Hi, I'm Eric Stewart, and I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation, where I'll give an overview of bedrock mapping in southwest Wisconsin that myself, Sarah Bremer, and Steve Mall have been working on. I'm going to talk about some of the highlights from our recent work down there and finish with our proposal for next year. Before I go on, I also want to acknowledge all the help we've gotten from many other folks at the survey, especially GIS help from Matt Raywald and field help from Carson Eames and Bill Batten. In June, we finished a one-year project to map two 7.5-minute quadrangles in Grant County in the southwestern part of the state. This was a one-year project. At the same time, we began year one of a planned 2-year mapping project in Lafayette County. So we just began that project a couple of months ago. Because we just began that current project, I'm going to focus on the results of our recently completed Grant County STATEMAP project. The motivation for bedrock mapping in both Grant and Lafayette counties is tied to elevated concentrations of nitrates and bacteria in many of the groundwater wells in the area. Bedrock mapping was initiated in part to support groundwater studies in the area. The ultimate goal of the Grant County project is to produce a 1 to 100,000 bedrock map of the county. Much of southern Grant County, however, was already mapped at 1 to 24,000 scale by the USGS several decades ago, and those map quadrangles are highlighted in this slide in dark green. To finish the county scale bedrock map, we propose mapping 6 additional quadrangles at 1 to 24,000 scale and compiling all the new mapping, historic mapping, and reconnaissance mapping in the outlying areas into a final 1 to 100,000 map. The 2 STATEMAP funded quadrangles are highlighted in this slide. And the 4 WGNHS internally funded quadrangles are highlighted in this slide. I'm going to talk about the results and highlights from mapping these 6 quadrangles in northern Grant County in general. Shown here is the finished geology for the 6 focus quadrangles. On these maps, the tan colors are quaternary units and the red and maroons are Paleozoic bedrock units. I've also highlighted the STATEMAP supported quadrangles kind of in the center. And these were quadrangles that Sarah Bremer led the mapping effort in, and I'll talk more about her results in a little bit. We were also interested in mapping the contacts in 3 dimensions, as this fly-through video highlights. We took the surface contacts shown in this video and combined them with subsurface well construction data to make rasters of unit contacts in 3 dimensions. We contoured the rasters to make structure contour maps, which help identify where folds and faults are. Structure contour maps are maps showing the elevations of the base of a particular unit over some area. And this map shows the base of the Platteville Formation. In this map, the warm colors are higher elevations and the cooler colors are lower elevations. And I'll just draw your attention to the 2 major structures shown in the base of the Platteville Formation. One is the Mineral Point anticline and the other is the Sin-McGill anticline. Accurately mapping the locations and understanding the physical characteristics of faults and folds is probably important. Last spring, we published a paper in Groundwater that found a correlation between arsenic detection in groundwater wells and proximity to bedrock folds. And this is for wells in the Beaver Dam area of eastern Wisconsin. As part of that study, we also found that a subset of wells within around 2 kilometers of folds had higher hydraulic conductivity values, and these are wells only open to the St. Peter sandstone. Hydraulic conductivity is a measure of how easily water moves through rock. On the plot on the lower right, hydraulic conductivity is plotted on the y-axis, and distance to the nearest mapped fold is on the x-axis. Hydraulic conductivity was estimated using specific capacity values reported in well construction reports. The scattered high values were interpreted to reflect fractured sandstone. We wondered why those elevated values were scattered about 2 kilometers as opposed to being focused much closer to the fold axis. And we weren't sure if this represented distributed deformation about the fold or uncertainty in the actual location of the fold. Another recent study, also looking at the St. Peter sandstone, but from northern Illinois, also found physical changes in the St. Peter in the vicinity of a map structure, in this case the Sandwich Fault Zone shown on the map in the bottom right. This modeling study found at least an order of magnitude reduction in horizontal hydraulic conductivity in the fault core and a 50% reduction in the surrounding damage zone. Based on the scale of the model grid, which is shown also on the figure in the bottom right, the model suggests the impacted zone may be several kilometers wide, similar to the impacted zone we found in the Beaver Dam area. We think the STATEMAP supported mapping that Sarah Bremer led in the Fenimore area of northern Grant County may help us understand the results just described. The map solution we ended up going with in that area contains a faulted zone along the steeper dipping northeastern limb of the Mineral Point anticline, and those features are labeled on the map on the top. The width of the faulted zone reaches up to about 1 kilometer and is found several kilometers from the axis of the Mineral Point anticline, suggesting deformation associated with this regional fold may extend for several kilometers away from the actual axis itself. The rocks in the faulted zone can be heavily fractured. The photo on the left shows galena formation cut by large vertical fractures running the length of the quarry wall. Similar large vertical fractures may be responsible for the scattered high hydraulic conductivity values seen in the Beaver Dam area. When a vertical well happens to intersect a vertical fracture, high values might result. Field observations near the Mineral Point anticline might also help explain the low horizontal hydraulic conductivity values seen in the Sandwich Fault zone. Deformation bands have been observed in outcrop along the fold. The bands can form webs of slightly more resistant sandstone, seen in the photo on the left. At the grain scale, they have markedly lower porosity and presumably permeability. The BSE image on the right shows a deformation band on the top left and sandstone matrix on the bottom right. Porosity is marked by the black color, and so there's much more porosity in the matrix than in the deformation band. So to summarize, in terms of groundwater wells, fracturing in the fold and fault zones may result in scattered high vertical hydraulic conductivity where these wells intersect the vertical fractures. In places where there are deformation bands, groundwater wells might end up with lower horizontal hydraulic conductivity. And all this is suggesting that these fold and fault zones are complicated features even in Wisconsin Paleozoic rocks, and they have very heterogeneous properties. Here we'll take a look at the Mineral Point anticline in 3D space. So we're looking at the base of the Decorah Formation here, and we're wrapping around, and we're going to look at the steeper northeast limb of the Mineral Point anticline here. You can see that as we approach it. There's 20 times vertical exaggeration in this video. And now we're following the Mineral Point anticline, and we're wrapping around, and we're seeing the faulted zone off in the distance there, marked by red. Most of the faults have somewhere between 20 and 60 feet of offset, we think. And I do want to thank Steve Mull for putting this video together. The 3D rasters are also useful for tackling other problems because they represent the elevation of a contact in 3D space. So we can use them to estimate where in the stratigraphic section certain surface features are located. So this is an example of springs and seeps observed in the field in northern Grant County. And we can use the raster to calculate where in the stratigraphic section these springs and seeps are occurring at. I'm going to focus on springs and seeps within the red box in the northwestern part of this map. This figure shows a generalized stratigraphic column for the area. Thin shale zones occur in several places within the section, but two important ones that I'm going to highlight are at the base of the Decorah Formation, which is called the Specs Ferry member, and the top red arrow is pointing to that location in the section. And also the Glenwood Formation, which is at the upper contact of the St. Peter Formation, and the lower red arrow is pointing to where the Glenwood occurs. In black, adjacent to the stratigraphic column, is a histogram showing where in the stratigraphic column most springs and seeps occur. And so there's a dominant peak where the Glenwood Shale is occurring, and a secondary peak near the base of the Decorah Formation where the Specs Ferry member is located. The histogram on the previous slide is important because it suggests The Specs Ferry member of the Decorah Formation and the Glenwood Formation are important aquatards in the area, and this is consistent with previous work in the area. However, the thickness of the Specs Ferry member changes across Grant County, and that is what this map is showing. This is a thickness or isopach map of the Specs Ferry member. Warmer colors are thicker, cooler colors are thinner. It goes from something like 7 feet thick in the west to around 2 feet thick in the east. The map is based off of several measured sections in the northwest and a little over 2,000 mining records from the historic zinc-lead mining district, and that's why the data points, which are the black dots, are so heavily concentrated in the southeast. One of the goals of this year's STATEMAP mapping project in Lafayette County, which the red arrow is pointing towards, is to better understand the diminishing impact of the Specs Ferry member as an important aquatard as the Specs Ferry thins. We are also using the rasters to estimate where in the stratigraphic section geochemical samples were taken from. Sarah and I collected a suite of samples from the St. Peter sandstone to look at the variation in iron, sulfur, and various potential contaminants. We were particularly interested in the top of the St. Peter, which is known to be more strongly cemented in iron sulfides, and it's this interval which forms a prominent scarp in the topography. Whole rock geochemical data is plotted in this slide. In each plot, the y-axis is depth in feet relative to the base of the Glenwood Formation, or top of the St. Peter. The x-axis plots the concentrations of arsenic, iron, lead, and sulfur. Not surprisingly, there are spikes in all of these at the Glenwood-St. Peter contact, which is represented by a depth of 0 on the y-axis. This contact is at the same stratigraphic horizon as the sulfide cement horizon in northeastern Wisconsin. The presence of the sulfide cement horizon in northeastern Wisconsin necessitated casing regulations in groundwater wells to improve water quality. Finally, I'll finish up highlights from the last year with a list of new publications that have come out from our group. And so in addition to the groundwater paper, which I already mentioned, there's a new map of the Rock Springs 7-minute quadrangle that just came out. For fiscal year 2022, we propose to continue bedrock mapping in Lafayette County. In addition to incorporating field and subsurface well data, we'll also coordinate with the planned airborne electromagnetic geophysical survey occurring in southwest Wisconsin this winter. This will provide exciting 3D control on subsurface geology.